Hi everyone, welcome back to the Property Finance Podcast. And today I want to talk about something that's come up pretty recently actually on quite a few deals, which is what do you do if you start to go over budget? Because people go into, or developers tend to go into panic mode. So they tend to start worrying, they'll rush out and go and get private investment, they'll go and put stupid interest rates on Facebook. Oh, we need 100 grand urgently, so we're going to pay 20% interest. And it all just gets a bit crazy. And I think one of the biggest tips that I would give a developer if they start to find that they're going over budget is talk to the lender. So communication is key within everything that we do. So whenever you're dealing with finance, whenever you're dealing with properties, whenever you're dealing with developments, communication is key on every single facet of all that we do. So if you start to notice that you're going over budget, I mean, one of the big things with development finance is that you tend to have a quantity surveyor who's there. So pretty quickly they're going to know if you're going to go over budget. They're going to have a pretty good idea fairly swiftly whether something's up with your procurement, whether you've got an issue, maybe if you've gone into the ground and found something you weren't expecting, contamination, for example. They're going to have a pretty good idea pretty quickly if you're going over budget. Now, if you have a feasibility study done up front, if you have a good QS report, if you've got a good contingency built in, chances are you're not going to go over budget. Where people tend to go over budget is, and we've seen this recently, is they start to over leverage themselves. So rather than, and I had an interesting discussion about this the other day with a developer that we're working with at the minute who unfortunately has gone into receivership. So they had an issue where they had basically exposed themselves to more than one site at once. And I had a really interesting conversation with the last remaining director. And he said, if we just stayed in this field, we would have been all right. He said, the reason why we didn't do what we wanted to do and why we're in the position that we're in is because we didn't focus on this field. He said, we overexposed ourselves. We went into 2 or 3 other fields. We should have just focused on this field. And the issue that they had is that they had worked on their first development. It was going brilliantly. They were £12 a square foot under budget, which is phenomenal. So they were budgeted to spend £120 a square foot. They were building out at £108 a square foot. So they were under budget. Procurement was going brilliantly. They had building merchants literally throwing themselves at these guys to win their business. So stuff was going really, really well. They had a really great team. They got a little bit complacent, and because things were going so well, they said, well, okay, let's line up a couple of other developments. So they lined up another development of 4 units, another development of 6 units. The problem that they then had was because they were taking their focus away from this field and focusing on other fields, is they started to lose control of their costs on this sort of primary field that they had. Now, where the issue came in for them is they didn't actually go over budget on this field. So they lost control a little bit, but they didn't go over budget. What happened was they then began to start the build on the second field, thinking, brilliant, our development finance is coming, we've got no issues, let's start building on this field. So they went and spent a load of money on that field, which naturally, as a development company, you begin to cross between different fields. And what had happened was they'd gone and spent all this money on this other field, about 300 grand. And their development finance didn't come off because pre-commencements hadn't been ticked off correctly. They were having issues around getting the planning sorted. So obviously development finance was paused until that happened. What happened was because they didn't have their development finance, that 300 grand that they spent over there then begins to impact this field over here. And that's where I think developers begin to lose control and go into issues because they don't focus on that one field. And we're natural it's just human nature to become greedy. And we tend to mask it within this belief that we're being smart, that we're being clever, and that we're doing the right thing. But actually, it is all driven by greed, because if you just focus on that one field and you just focus on really hammering your numbers down on that one field and you really focus on getting your sales on that one field, it then, when it all goes through, when the sales go through, you then move on to the next field. Once you are an established business, once you've done a few developments, then you can start doing more than one at a time, because I think that's when you can allow, once you have full control, once you've had control over a number of sites previously, that's where you can start to expand out and do a couple at a time. It's very, very different running 2 development sites at the same time as opposed to running 2 refurbs at the same time. Running 2 refurbs at the same time is far easier. You're only concentrating on 2 houses. It's far easier to keep control. Running 2 developments at a time, you could be talking about 19 houses, you could be talking about groundwork, you could be talking about utility connections, really you could be talking about anything on that development site is going to be far more intensive than anything that you might have on those refurb sites. So when it comes to managing this process, I mean, this podcast was all about what happens when you overrun, but actually we've kind of taken it off on a bit of a tangent and started speaking about actually how to kind of manage your costs. But I think the key bit to bring it back to the main point of the podcast, which was what to do when you overrun. I think having that clear communication at all times with everyone, broker, lender, solicitors, QS, etc. It's all about keeping that communication. And the thing that surprises a lot of people, I find, is that actually if you go to your lender and you say, well, actually we've overrun by X amount, or we think we're going to overrun by X amount, is you'll be surprised how many lenders are willing to actually work with you and put in that extra money in order to keep the development moving as it should be. Because the thing that a lot of people forget is that actually it's quite difficult for lenders to repossess, not in the sense of that they can repossess and take control very easily, but what makes it difficult to repossess is actually the cost involved and actually just the general arse-ache of having to repossess it and then go and sell it and probably finish the development off themselves. Because again, if they repossess something, the receiver that they use is probably going to say to them, well, actually it's more cost effective for you, the lender, to go and finish the build and then try and sell it, rather than selling it for a loss. We've got one at the moment where one of the lenders is looking to go through a breach, and they've come to the conclusion that they're going to have to finish the build themselves. So actually, why would they? Why not chuck an extra 50 grand in the client's direction and say, look, you finish it, get it sold, it's more cost effective for us. And I think a lot of people kind of forget about that. So if you sense an overspend coming, I think what's key is that you need to communicate that with the lender as quickly as possible and work out, before you go into panic mode, speak to the broker, speak to the lender, say, right, look, this is what's going to happen. Can you lend us the extra money? If they say no, then by all means go into panic mode. Then go into trying to find an investor as quick as possible, going into that mode of offering stupid rates of return. But even then, you've still got other options to fall back on: mezzanine finance, dev exit, wind and watertight, all of which I've done podcasts on before, which you can have a listen to. But the key bit is communication. And I guess actually a podcast that started talking about overspend has kind of turned into keeping communication going throughout. But I think that's one of the most important things that you can do as a developer, is keeping that communication going. So hopefully that's useful. Hopefully that gives you a bit of confidence that as a developer, even if things do start to go wrong, you still have multiple different ways of getting out. And hopefully a few tips and tricks there. Obviously we mentioned about focusing on the one field. I think I really would push that point home. I think too many people get greedy and very much try and become kind of this multi-site developer really, really quickly. And you're not a developer until you've built something. And realistically, you're not a successful developer until you've built and sold something. And I think far too many people get to the point of they get out the ground and they go, brilliant, I'm a developer, I'm going to go do loads of other sites. And I think very much, especially as a first-time developer, when you're getting into something that is so risky, you need to make sure that you are laser focused on that one site. And yeah, some of the most successful developers I know work on one site at a time. They get it through the build, they get it sold. And that's not to say that they don't work on sort of multiple at the same time, but what they tend to do is, one of the most successful developers I know has a sort of 3-site rule. So what they'll do is they'll have one site going through planning, one site going through build, one site going through sale. And they do that because then at any one point, they've got something going on at different points. It means that their build team is constantly busy. And the thing as well is that they don't move. So this one that's in planning, it won't move into the build phase until the build phase of that site is done. And that one won't move until the sales are done, etc. So it really is a case of they will wait until each one finishes its phase before moving on to the next one. And I think that's really, really key. So as I said, hopefully that's been helpful. If you've enjoyed the episode, please do share it on social media. Please do leave a review. Reviews really do help, especially at the moment as we're gaining so much momentum with the podcast. So yeah, any review that you can leave would be greatly appreciated. And otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one.